Hello, my fine friends. Welcome back to Destination Discourse. I'm your host, Stuart Butler, joined today by Breakmaster Adam. How are you, sir?
Oh, we're still doing it. I love it. Okay, Breakmaster Adam. You know what?
hmm
I didn't think of a wrestling name for you. Maybe I'll debut it by the end of the show, but I'm glad to be here, Stuart.
No worries. And we might publish out of order so that you could have completely broken the canonicalization of the show by doing that. I don't know. But how you doing today, Adam? You recovered
I'm
from
good.
Vegas last week?
Yeah, you know what? Had an incredible time in Vegas, and my reward as I came back into town was a dance competition where my three girls spent, I think I spent 13 hours in an auditorium at a high school watching a whole lot of dance, and about 17 minutes of the 13 hours was my daughter's dancing. So it was great.
I don't detect any sarcasm in that at all. Did they win at least?
You know what? They did. In fact, my youngest daughter, they kind of won the overall for the morning session, and she's never won that before. So it was really fun to watch, and got to she's so little that the banner was taller than she was, and so it was kind of a funny moment when they were trying to take the picture of her next to the other girls on stage. They had to really adjust the poster to let her face even show up when they took the picture. So it was funny.
So, as a parent, man, you should know by now it's not about you. And you started by whinging, kind of complaining, whining about your time being spent on this. You buried the lead, man. You should have led with the tremendous success from your daughter. So do
Well,
better next time, Adam.
listen, I'm incredibly proud of my daughters, and I appreciate that you, as largely a boy dad, can judge me for the way I talk about dance competitions. It's a little bit of if you know, you know.
Yeah, I guess. It was interesting. I have a niece and nephews that did dance and do dance, so I've partaken in my fair amount of dance competitions. And you're right, it does take a while, but totally worth it when they bring home the gold.
Totally worth it.
And speaking of bringing home the gold, before I introduce our guest, I did want to announce we got some news this morning that Traveling the Spectrum is now Emmy nominated TV show Traveling the Spectrum. So how about
Oh my
that?
goodness. Well,
Isn't
it's
that cool?
deserved. It's
I know.
deserved. It's incredible TV.
Yeah. So we got the E. We're going to work on the Grammy and the Oscar and the Tony next. So we're going for an EGOT for Visit Myrtle Beach. So we will be the
Love it.
first destination to get our own EGOT. So, but we are super thrilled, and obviously that'll bring a lot of awareness to the show and to the project in general around sensory friendly travel. So we're super
Fantastic.
excited about that. Yeah, and thank you for all you guys
Amazing.
do for us. But we have a guest today. I don't know, Adam, probably more appropriate for you to introduce the guests, in as you're
Yeah.
very familiar with this gentleman.
Yeah, so and I'm really excited. His name's Camden Bernatz, and Camden is he's been our creative director for a long time, and now oversees. I'm not going to bore the audience with the way we've kind of restructured our organization, but he oversees all content creation for the organization, especially as it pertains to the content pillars that we've been working on for tourism destinations. And Camden has worked with us now. Camden, how long has it been?
A little over 5 years now.
Yeah, a little
And
over
Camden, I
five
feel like
years.
Adam should know that. I would call him
It's
out
all
on that.
right.
You know what? It feels like it's funny because I could say I could go either way with a joke here on what it feels like, but it feels like 5 years. That's about right. Um, Camden started as an SEO specialist in our organization, and every time we've given him a project, he's just leveled up and leveled up and leveled up, and until now he's running all the content creation for our organization. And so Camden has done, even since the beginning when he started working with us, he's thought a lot about DMOs. I've sat through him and I talking through kind of the logic of DMO structure and tax revenue generation and impact and all of that. And Camden went through a really interesting thought discussion that he brought to me. And he's like, I kind of think I'd like to talk about this and get some of this thought exercise that I did out there in the world because DMOs need to hear it. And so I reviewed it and I was like, oh, there's some really interesting stuff in here, and it would be good to debate it on Destination Discourse. So Camden's here. He's brought this thought exercise with him, and I'm sure we'll get to that after Stu's news. But Camden, it's great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me. Excited.
Yeah, I mean, this is not gonna tease it a little bit more because I can't think of a better platform for this conversation than Destination Discourse. We want to sort of argue both sides, and the whole exercise you went through really does that. And so that's going to be really exciting. But Adam, you already foreshadowed before we get into the topic. It is time for the greatest segment in all of entertainment and maybe all of information sharing ever created universally across the entire galaxy and really the universe, I guess. So,
You're
you want
absolutely
to
correct.
you want to key up the jingle?
Absolutely.
Feel like you should be more prepared than this. I'm not hearing anything right now. So
Are you not? Oh,
no.
dang
Are
it.
you playing it?
Okay.
You didn't share your
You know
screen?
what? I played it and didn't hit the share button. So here we go.
So for
Round
everyone
two.
listening, Adam's literally sitting there bobbing his head and grinning and I guess listening to the song while we're hearing silence.
I got to hear it twice. This is a special day.
Yeah, it's special for sure.
And I'm only going to play it once because I already played it twice. Okay.
Yeah. So this article comes from the Seattle Times, and it's a phenomenon. You know, we've had a lot of sort of new types of travel, like our industry likes to do that, whether that's set jetting or other stuff. But I thought this was cool because I'm seeing this really as a positive for our destination. But it's the concept of time tripping or time travel. Some people are calling it too. But it seems like there's an increasing number of people looking for nostalgic trips to recreate memories from their past. And it makes sense, right? I think in any time humans we are going through times of uncertainty and change, we typically revert to former versions of ourselves, or we seek experiences we had in maybe a simpler or more fun time. And some of that, it comes with just aging, right? We sort of have a rose-tinted view of our past, like a romanticized view of our past. But it does seem like data suggesting that more and more people are looking to recreate vacations from the past or recreate memories from the past. And this is a multi-generational thing. So, things like taking your kids to do the things you did so they can experience it and they can have the time. And, for a place like Myrtle Beach, which is a multi-generational destination, we've seen a lot of success with this angle, with our messaging, with our commercials, with content, and it's been really, really beneficial to us. But the fact they've sort of named this and they're pushing it, I thought was an interesting article. So, Adam, what's your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so I think there's two ways to look at this, and I think there's a short-sighted way and more of a long-term approach to this. And my fear with this idea of nostalgic travel is that a lot of people would get caught up in the short-term solution. I talk a lot about hunting versus farming. I'll just give the brief overview for those that haven't heard it. But hunting, if let's say you're out in the wilderness, you got to get food for your family. You have two choices, hunting and farming. Hunting, you go, you kill a deer, you bring it back, and 2 days later, you got to go hunt again, right? Farming, it takes a lot more time, a lot more effort. You got to till the earth, you got to plant the seeds, water the crops, all that. But then you'll actually have grain to fill your silos for the entire winter. So you've got two different options, right? And I feel like the hunting approach to this nostalgic travel would be, well, let's make sure that we are doing campaigns or content inviting people to come back and recreate the experiences of their childhood. My opinion is that for some of those people, that ship may have already sailed in some way, shape, or form. But what we could really do is double down on the experiences we create for children to guarantee that we have that group wanting to come back the next generation. And I agree that we should be looking at getting these people who came as kids to the destination and helping them recreate those experiences. But the long-term view would be, let's just make incredible experiences for kids if it's a family destination, so that we can have that generational travel baked in and guaranteed for the future.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons we love sports tourism so much in our destination. We're getting so many kids coming for sporting events, for dance competitions, maybe for the parents that love their children, and for soccer and baseball. And this is the next generation. So to bring them here at a young age, where are they going to want a vacation when they're older and when they have kids in the place that they grew up and have these great memories? So I think it's good. And it's not just travel, right? We've also seen, Revenge of the Sith, the Star Wars movie, movie with the prequels, episode 3 was re-released. It's the 20th anniversary right now, and it's breaking like so many box office records. And it's nostalgia. People right now are really seeking nostalgia, and I've seen so many people that, you know, were 5 to 15 when it came out that are now like 25 to 35 that are taking their kids to see it because they want to recreate those memories that they had around something that they love so much. So nostalgia has always been a powerful motivator for people, but it seems like right now, especially right now, it's even more than it has been in the past. Oh, Camden,
It
did you
helps
read
that
this
all the
article?
new movies suck. You know.
Well, that could be a whole nother episode on its own. I would beg to differ. But Camden, you have a take on this? Did you have a chance to read the article?
I have not read the article, but now I want to. I just anecdotally, I would agree that I know that that's I myself personally and my family members, people I'm connected to. There's still, I don't know if it's necessarily renewed from my experience, but a continual effort to kind of access experiences from the past or keep tradition moving forward and things like that. So I definitely want to read that article, but anecdotally, I would say, yeah, that makes sense to me.
Cool. All righty. So let's move into the topic. So
You know what? Hey,
Camden,
Stuart, but
yeah.
before we do, I just got to say, I wasn't talking about the new Star Wars movies. I was talking about the movie industry in general,
Oh,
latest
good
movie. So
way
I
to
didn't want to
backtrack.
hurt your
Okay.
feelings too
Yeah.
much on that one.
You know, you almost caused this to cancel the future of this show. I'll be
That's what I
honest.
was
You're
worried
attacking my
about.
beloved franchise.
It's a good thing you
There,
guys aren't in the same room. That's all right.
that's true. Yeah, we could have come to blows for sure. Um, thank you for clarifying that or backtracking, whichever it was. Um, so Camden, do you want to walk us through your thought process and sort of set up what it is that you did and why?
Yeah, to be honest, it's been a couple weeks now, so I can't even remember exactly what spurred this thought to do this. But at some point, I had the idea. I wanted to just kind of use Chat GPT as like a sounding board and to talk about not any specific marketing tactic in general, but just the nature of DMOs or CVBs and what they set out to accomplish, the strengths, weaknesses. I basically asked it to first make the case against them. Like, what are the weaknesses or the problems? Or if you were super anti DMO or CVB, what would be your reasons for that? And then, okay, now flip to the other side. What are the reasons that they should, that they're very worthwhile and that should be supported, and that they, the good things. And then I asked it at the end to then, okay, look at both sides, and now what's your takeaway? Which side wins out? What's your conclusion based on now you've argued both sides? So I want to just kind of share you guys the things that ChatGPT suggested as the case for and against DMOs and CVBs, and then I think the most important part is kind of the takeaway. And I think it's hopefully for those who are listening in that space, it's insightful and perhaps even motivating. For the sake of time, I'll just hit the highlights so we're getting too in the weeds now. But yeah, that's kind of I wanted to share with you guys what it said. This isn't my own take necessarily, although I agree with some of these things. This is just kind of what ChatGPT suggests are the strengths, weaknesses, and the so what when it comes to DMOs and
So
CVBs.
so Camden, why do you hate DMO so much, man? Why would you even pose such a question as what talk against DMOs, why they shouldn't exist?
I
I mean,
plead the fifth.
what a
No.
controversial thing. Now, I think, it's funny. I could see us getting some criticism for doing this episode, Adam, but I think it's important that we have it, right? Because for
Yeah.
too long, I think, to Zeke Coleman's point on the data episode, the causation versus correlation episode, we tend to keep our head buried in the sand. We tend to take the blue pill rather than the red pill, and we try to pretend like everything's fine until it's not, right? And we see what's going on with Florida right now, trying to defund DMOs. We see what happened just today that we're recording, where Brand USA has had 5 of its board members removed from the board by the Trump administration, right? And I'm not going to have comment on that politically.
Yeah.
I'm just saying there's volatility and risk everywhere. And so one of the best ways to defend yourself often is to play the role of the aggressor, play the role of the detractor and the person that's trying to pull you apart. And so I love this. I think it's, is there risk in us even opening this conversation? 100%. But I think the bigger risk is in us all pretending this conversation isn't already being had
Yeah.
somewhere else. So let's be knowledgeable and aware of it. So, Adam, do you
Well,
want to
and
add anything else before Camden
yeah,
jumps in?
Yeah, I mean, the best ammunition that we could have is to know if somebody's going to attack us as a DMO in some way, shape, or form, what would they do? And now with AI, ChatGPT has opened up a brand new way that's very, very easy. Because if I were if I were going through the exercise Camden did, not only would I say what's the case against, but then I would say, okay, well, if I want to attack that funding, how should I do it? Legislatively,
Oh,
how should I do it?
yeah.
And I mean, if we want to pretend that that's not going to happen with somebody that dislikes how we're using the funds or doesn't believe in the value we're bringing, we're our heads in the sand, like you said. And so this is going to happen, and hopefully this serves as kind of a preemptive vehicle for everybody that's listening to be able to head that off in some way.
Yeah. And I think we have to be humble enough to say it's possible there's some truth in some of the criticisms, right? It's possible that times have obviously changed, and if we don't change, then maybe we aren't as relevant or as valuable as we once were. We talked about this in recent episodes, how the website could completely go away. We could get completely disintermediated in the current the way that people plan travel, and so when things are shifting, we need to understand where our weaknesses are, so that we can evolve and so that we can improve, especially when the criticisms are fair criticisms. So, Camden, the evil Camden who hates all DMOs and wants us all to go away.
Hey, I asked
Make
it to make the case for them as well. I wanted to see both sides.
Well, right now we're
Yeah.
going to
Oh,
start with the other side. So go for it, man.
The
yeah. So
evil
I,
side of Camden goes
like
first.
I
Yeah,
said,
yeah.
this is I'm just reading what it gave me. So you guys either agree with it, tear it apart, react. I'll just kind of give you what it
Hey, could you
said
put
one
on
at
a
a
fake
time.
mustache for like this first part so we know this the evil twin, and then for the second part you take the mustache off?
We'll edit that in post, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the first one, so the case against, let's start out with the evil version, is the argument that DMO CVBs are operating on an outdated model in a disrupted landscape. They were created in an area when centralized marketing bodies were necessary to put destinations on the map, so to speak. But today's travel planning is no longer top down; it's decentralized, digital, and peer driven. And so DMOs, the argument it makes is that are trying to function kind of like the gatekeepers to this when they no longer are the gatekeepers, and therefore they're inherently struggling with inefficiency in that sense. Reaction.
I actually agree with that comment 100%. I think it's true. I don't think our job, right? If you think about how we operate, and we still do it to a degree, but it's we're going to spend paid media somewhere to drive them to our own ecosystem, and we want to control that ecosystem until we send them off to our members to go book. And we're not none of those KPIs are things we can put in the bank or say that are actually helping our community necessarily. At the end of the day, if people are finding information about us and coming to our destination and spending their money and leaving, a good footprint and leaving, going back home and telling their friends they had a great time, it really shouldn't matter to us whether they found that information or made that booking through us, as long as we impacted it, as long as we influenced it, and we can measure and demonstrate that we had that impact. So I sort of agree with that one.
Yeah. Well,
Adam?
I'll add that if you remember when destinations did start, there was no ability to book online for all
Right.
of the stakeholders that we support. And now it's not only that, yeah, they have that ability with our stakeholders. It's worse than that. In some cases, we may be competing with our stakeholders for the value of a click or impressions or whatever it is. And once we get into a competitive set, that gets really dangerous for our relationships with our stakeholders. And so from a relevance perspective, I think it's really, really important that we're thinking through that in our marketing strategy. I know you've mentioned, Stuart, that there's a lot of keywords that you avoid in your
Hmm.
paid search strategy because you don't want to
Right.
be in a competitive set with your stakeholders. But yeah, I think this is a relevant comment because the time when DMOs were created and the reason they were created, a lot of the evolution has changed some of the factors that got it started.
Yeah, it's not just that bookings didn't exist, online bookings didn't exist. Online, aggregated information didn't exist. There was
Yeah.
no way for me to find out a list of hotels in Myrtle Beach in, let's say, the 1930s, right? That didn't exist. So the only way I could do that was maybe locally there was something like a Yellow Pages,
Yeah.
but that was it. So DMOs had a role to fill a void that existed. That void doesn't exist. That information exists on TripAdvisor and Google and everywhere else. So um, I don't think just evolving what we do, what we've always done to the next technology makes sense. Like if we don't
Yeah.
have a need to play that role anymore, we shouldn't. We should look at other ways we can drive value in other gaps that exist. All right, what's number two?
Number two is, this is not going to be news to anybody, I'm sure, listening, but just because of the inherent struggle in tourism, destination marketing to show attribution, there's a lot of, what it says here is questionable ROI and accountability. DMOs frequently receive public funding, often from hotel taxes, yet they operate without clear accountability or market-driven performance benchmarks. So the metrics are vague, like impressions and reach and things like that, instead of actual dollars, and that leads to sometimes inefficient spending and a lack of attribution.
Adam, you want to take it on first?
I don't know. I'm really excited to hear the argument for, and I don't mean that as I'm starting to agree with all of this, but the problems are very clear, and it's actually fascinating that ChatGPT has such a clear grasp on the problems that exist. And I think this is another problem, a major problem when it comes to, yeah, we're having a hard time showing attribution, which leads to inefficient marketing spend. I mean, these are all things that we've been talking about ad nauseum on this show. So I agree with that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think that one's distributed as equally as the first one, right? I think there are certainly DMOs that do a better job than others.
Yeah.
But I think that to ChatGPT and Evil Camden's point, there are DMOs out there that are not just reporting on data that's sort of flimsy, but they're actively burying information that maybe isn't positive for them, wouldn't look good, right? So they're going to cherry pick the data that tells the story they want to tell. And so I think that's where we could get caught, because whether we like it or not, DMOs get tarnished with the same brush. And so if one or two bad actors or lazy actors or incompetent actors are in the bunch, we could all get the shrapnel from that, right? There could be a backlash because of one or two bad actors. So I think we've all got to do a better job saying, let's take the red pill. Yes, in the short term, that might mean some of our vanity metrics we can't lean on anymore, but we've got to believe we're doing a good job. And if we're doing a good job, there's got to be ways for us to be able to tell that story in a ethical and transparent way. So I agree, it is a weak spot right now, because if people really started pulling on the threads at some DMOs, I think it would lead to some not pleasant revelations. So yeah, ChatGPT is once again, it's sort of calling our baby ugly, but it's not wrong, right? So what's the next one?
Okay. And if we have time, we go back to this, but I want to get kind of the ones that I think are the strongest, just so for the sake of time, and we can move on to the next one. But this one, I think I'd be curious to hear what you guys say, because I think I've heard this in DMO circles be discussed in various ways, and it talks about one of the challenges is that the DMOs, since they exist to drive tourism, sometimes there's tourism and growth at any cost, and favoring tourism over community well-being. There's some places that residents complain about over tourism and say, we don't want more people coming here. It's too crowded, or we can't get a spot at our local restaurant because all the tourists are here, whatever. But the DMO is continually driving tourism, and sometimes residents feel like they're an afterthought as opposed to visitors.
Yeah. And keep in mind, like ChatGPT didn't fabricate any of this stuff, right? It's a probabilistic generative tool that is using all the data it's collected to create these responses. So it didn't just intuit this. It's conversation that's being had. So that's part of why it's so accurate. But I think that one I understand the comment. I understand that particularly in the past there have been destinations that have maybe not managed distribution of tourism as well. I would argue over the last certainly 5 to 10 years that pendulum has swung heavily in the other direction, where people are very conscious of it and proactive about it. Now, that doesn't mean we're not without isolated incidents, like Barcelona comes to mind, where they turn very anti-tourism. But I think that is a criticism of the DMO, not the function of the DMO driving over tourism, but a lack of integration with the community to educate people on the value of tourism. That's why things like NTTW that's coming up next week, or maybe it's already happened when we publish this one. That's why things like NTTW are so important, that we get that message out to local media about the value of tourism. Because that same person that says, I can't get a seat at my local restaurant, my favorite restaurant, that restaurant probably wouldn't be open if it weren't for tourists, and that's the narrative that we need to be pushing out, not that there's too many people there. Adam?
Yeah. I think the only place I'd push back on you a little bit, Stuart, is I think in rural markets, it's much more pronounced, because you end up with destinations whose populations will double or triple in the summertime, and they literally don't have the workforce to be able to manage the
Mhm.
volume of people that are coming. I still think in most cases, like you said, it's a distribution problem as opposed to an over tourism problem. But I think from a rural perspective, there's probably more destinations that will resonate with than in the more urban or even beach destinations who have a good population to pull from.
Yeah, for sure. But it's still a valid criticism of the people that are against DMOs, right? So I
Yeah.
think it's something we need to be aware of. Alrighty.
So I'm gonna move on to the next one if that's okay. Just for those are kind of, I think, the heavy hitters of the anti-DMO argument.
That's
In
all they got,
summary,
man. That's all you got, evil.
I've got some
You know?
more, but I want to make sure you get to the good stuff too. I
Okay.
guess let me read the summary though. So each time I asked it to do that, it kind of gave us a summary of what it's all of the points we're capturing. And one part that I think kind of sums it up well, it says, in their place, meaning the place of the DMO or CVB, more agile, decentralized, and community-first models are emerging, ones that prioritize authenticity over advertising, sustainability over visitor volume, and local empowerment over centralized control. Rather than investing millions in top-down marketing, it's time to invest in bottom-up storytelling, resident-led strategy, and smarter tourism systems that truly serve the places we love, according to ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Now, I got to ask, Camden, did you do this in the destination marketing agent or ChatGPT itself?
This one was just straight up ChatGPT.
I wanted to make sure, because honestly, it sounded so aligned with some of the stuff
Yes.
that I've said. I wanted to make sure that we weren't poisoning the well with it being my resources that it was pulling from. But if that's the general ChatGPT description, I guess I just stand correct.
If I do say so myself. That's funny.
All right. So you ready for the case for DMOs and CVBs?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's rip off the mustache, Camden.
Yes. So number one, they are stewards of place-based economic development. At their core, DMOs are economic development engines that use tourism as a tool to stimulate local economies, diversify income streams, and support small businesses. So it's basically just high impact returns. The value and the effort, even if it gets a little messy, is clearly helpful to these communities that they serve. Um, and that the tax revenue comes in without taxing the locals. Like you mentioned, some things that you're saving money on your taxes as a resident because of tourism, and they are helping the locals, whether or not they always, and I'm adding this part now, they don't always necessarily think about that or are aware of that, but you're helping the economy locally.
So that's the ROI argument, which I agree with for sure. I think it's one of those narratives that is important, but it cannot be what you solely rested on, right? I think you got to go deeper than that. But for us, whenever anyone sort of starts questioning your funding or saying that money would be better spent XYZ, I think it's important that every DMO is doing a good job educating people on that ROI and what the net impact is. Because if you take $1 out of marketing and put it into, say, product development or something else, to the layman, they might say, that's free money. All I'm doing is moving $1 from here to here, and I'd rather invest here. What they're not doing is thinking about the downstream impact of taking that dollar out of marketing. And if we're doing our job, that $1 being invested should be generating significantly more, like 10x that in tax dollars. And so taking $1 out of here isn't just moving $1, it's actually moving $10 out of the bucket of taxes and putting into $1 into this. So I think it's a nuanced, deeper, complex conversation that not all DMOs are having or even willing to have because of the fear.
Well, and it goes back to, I think Bill Geist said it on this show when we had him on, that data without a story is somewhat meaningless,
Hmm.
right? So there's a lot of us DMOs who are generating an ROI, but are doing a poor job of telling that story. If a tree falls in the forest, right? Does anybody hear it? And that's where I think the data in and of itself, if we're generating an ROI, that's not enough. It's the public's perception of our generation of ROI that matters. And I think that's where a lot of organizations fall short.
Yeah, agreed. Okay.
Okay, point number two for why they are worthwhile. Coordinated strategy requires a central hub. Tourism isn't just marketing, it's logistics, partnerships, data, and brand coherence. DMOs provide centralized coordination that no single business or creator could achieve alone, unifying in messaging, cross sector collaboration, managed crisis response, for example. They serve as a hub that instead of having a bunch of people that
Yeah.
are not connected come together, they serve that function.
100% agree with this one. I
Yep.
think, one of the things we do as an organization is we go on a board retreat every year. We take our full board and our senior staff and we go to another destination. We'll have board meetings there and we'll do some strategic planning, but we also immerse ourselves in that community and we get to see the cool things they have going on. But we also sit down with our counterparts at Chambers of Commerce in DMOs and learn from them and their history. And what we've been doing is really selecting places that have had challenges. We've been to Panama City Beach, which had a hurricane. We just came back from Asheville area, which had obviously a hurricane last year. And so we're really trying to understand from them what was the role that they played and what was the expectations from their membership. Because you're 100% right. When there is a crisis, when there is a challenge that faces a community, one of our primary responsibilities as an organization is to convene people and to disseminate information and be the source of truth for people, especially when the information is it's high stakes information like with a crisis like that. So 100% agree with this one. And I don't know that every DMO fully embraces this. There's still DMOs out there that feel like their job is to just be the promotion engine. 100% that's one of the legs of the stool, but you've got to get ingrained with the community. You've got to provide deep value beyond that as well. So this one I agree with.
Yeah, I'm kind of loving the argument for so far, because I actually think it's a great framework for destinations to build their local messaging around. And okay, if you're scratching these itches on the argument for publicly in your storytelling, you're probably not going to have a lot of attacks on your budget, right?
Hmm.
And so if one of the benefits is we're stronger together, if we're all connected and we're aggregating those marketing dollars, and then we're also aggregating communication and engagement in the local community. All of that is incredibly valuable. And if you're doing it correctly, the residents are going to feel and see that value as well. So
Yeah.
I think that's a great argument for a DMO. And I think they need to lean into it in their communication with the community.
Yeah, and even if you're not a member-driven organization, or like in our case, we're a chamber and a CVB, and some DMOs out there aren't member-driven organizations, they aren't a chamber, they would say, well, that's not really our job. What I'm saying, and what we're saying, I think, is whether it's directly in your mandate or not, you need to be in that playing in that sandbox because it's one of the best forms of defense you can have. If you have a moat around you of people, stakeholders, the business community that are in the tourism business industry in your community, that's going to help you weather
Yeah.
some of these storms.
But that's not my job attitude is essentially saying my job is what was originally outlined before the evolution of marketing and media
Hmm.
and consumer behavior. And what that means is your days are essentially numbered because your role as an organization has to evolve with all the other circumstances that we're dealing with. And so I would be really nervous for anybody that listens to those comments and says that's not my job.
Yeah, for sure.
It won't be for long.
Wow, that's brutal, man.
I don't mean it to. I'm hoping that this is coming off as a cautionary discussion.
I mean, you just
I
put on your mustache, man. You're evil Adam now.
I'm worried. I'm worried for the people that I've seen that have a complacent approach to what needs to happen in destination marketing. And I have seen a lot of that's not my job, so let's not deal with it. And I think that is probably the very best way to get a target on your back from your local stakeholders and politicians. And I've watched the people that have said that's not my job. I've watched them a year, 2 years later complain to me, oh man, I've got this politician that has chosen our budget as his platform and
Mhm.
yada, yada, yada. And I'm kind of like, we saw this coming. And I think everybody needs to make sure they're evolving and not just focused on what the original charge for DMOs was.
Yeah. Although technically the original charge was serving the member. It was Detroit in what 1896 that put together the first DMO, and it was businesses that came together to elevate the destination collectively. So it's in the spirit of the original destination marketing organizations.
Yeah.
All right. What's next, Ken?
So another point it makes is that these organizations level the playing field for smaller destinations. Without a DMO, only major cities or well-funded companies get attention. DMOs help rural, underrepresented, or emerging destinations gain visibility in a highly competitive global tourism landscape.
Yeah. And I'd extend that one. It's not just that it doesn't just bring a little parity to destinations, it also brings parity to businesses within a destination, right? We can reach an audience that maybe a small mom and pop motel can't, whereas the big like Win Las Vegas can. So I think it's an amplifier and an equalizer, an equity builder for everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. I would just add the caveat when executed correctly, all of that is true.
Yeah.
And when not executed correctly, very little of that is true. And so, yeah, that's my only caveat there.
Yeah, and I think the extension of this, although I'm not sure if this is one of the points as well that you're going to dig into, it also gives a collective voice for the industry within to other stakeholders, right? So not only is it an amplifier for destinations, for individual businesses, but it's also for the community. Like, say you have some legislation that is important, it's going to negatively impact tourism in your destination, then a CVB or DMO going with more clout to your state representatives is going to have more impact. And then they can also be the coordinator to all of the businesses to say, hey, here are the talking points. We need you to pick up the phone, call your representatives. Here's the narrative right now. And then you have a cohesive approach to problem solving. So
Agreed.
So the next thing, and I'm leaving a few of them on the table. If you want to put in the show notes, people can read some of the other ones. But I want to make sure I get to this last section here. I asked it before I had asked it for the final takeaway in its opinion. I said, well, first of all, analyze what you've just said on both sides. What are the strengths and weaknesses of both of your arguments? Like
mhm,
poke your own argument, poke holes in your own argument now. And so it said major weaknesses of the anti-DMO argument are one, it romanticizes decentralization. Two, the lack of coordination is a real risk. And three, who picks up the slack? Even if there are these issues that DMOs and CVBs face, the elimination of them, if you were to just not have them exist, who's doing those things that they do serve, the function that they do serve, who picks up the slack? And
mhm.
then the major weaknesses of the pro DMO argument, and I think you'll like that. I think these are not as strong as like they're not really saying that DMOs shouldn't exist. They're more assumption. So for example, it says that this is the pro DMO argument assumes DMOs are already evolving. Many aren't. You guys just touched on this. Like we're talking about what a good DMO could be, an efficient strategy should be. Not everyone's doing that. And so there, if you're a bad DMO, maybe you're not doing that much of a public good, but inherently your job isn't necessarily doing a bad thing. If you're doing it well, it's a public good. And then the challenge that ROI still remains murky. We haven't fully solved for that yet when it comes to attribution and stuff like that. And in some cases, public accountability is still a little bit shaky. DMOs sit in a strange place, funded like public entities, but often operating like private organizations, which leads to governance and equity issues sometimes. Do you want to respond to that before I get to the final takeaway?
Adam, take it away.
I mean, for me, I like that I don't know, it's fascinating to me to listen to ChatGPT poke holes in its own arguments. Just the layers of that are kind of interesting to me because I don't know that a lot of humans, when you ask them to go back and poke holes in their own arguments, that they give a really compelling hole in their argument. So it speaks to the power of AI that it can even do that without any emotion or demand to be right tied in there, right? But the most important thing that I feel like I heard, especially in the holes in the argument against, is there is no one else. And when you look at the communities that we serve as DMOs, this is why they need you to be your very best, is because nobody else can do what you do. And even if there's a great argument against, some of the value that DMOs bring or what some of us are doing in our communities, nobody's there. There is no safety net to pick up the slack. And that's why the responsibility as a DMO to take those tax dollars and spend them as efficiently and intelligently as possible, I think is really critical, because you're the only line of defense. And even if you got defunded, nobody's going to pick up the slack. So you've got to do an incredible job. And that's why evolving with consumer behavior, evolving with the media landscape, and evolving with technology is so critical for a DMO to keep that promise to the community, because you really are the last line of defense for the dozens or hundreds or thousands of stakeholders, depending on the size of your destination, that depend on you for survival.
Yeah. So Cam, did you happen to ask it to criticize its criticisms of its original points?
I
Because
didn't
I
get
bet it
too.
would too.
Yeah, I didn't go that far. I asked it to
You could
criticize original, but
incremental or infinitely regress that. But
yeah,
I think what's interesting is they're sort of making, on one side, they're saying, here's all the bad things about DMOs and here's all the good things, but the good things only apply if you're doing a good job. So, well, you could flip that and say, well, the bad things are only a bad thing if you're not doing a good job, right? So, no, I think the criticisms are fair. So let's jump into like on the balance. So you asked it to sort of sum it
yeah.
up and pick a
I
side,
I
Can I,
basically.
never.
real quick, Camden,
Yeah.
Go
we
ahead.
haven't heard any analysis from you. So I would say before you get to
Yeah, good point.
ChatGPT's takeaway, I'd really like to know, like, what did this exercise do for you? And I personally have been involved in lots of discussions with you where you struggled with some of these things. So I'd love to hear where you landed before we hear where ChatGPT landed.
Yeah, I don't want to take too much of your time on that, but I very much the things every time I read, like, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And so I think every industry, every organization has challenges, and I think it's good for DMOs to be honest about where they are, where their challenges are, or where they tend to be weaker in trying to demonstrate that value so that they can address it. But I don't think so. I am not to highlight my one I guess critique or my struggle personally when it comes to working with DMOs. I've never worked internally, but as an agency partner, when it comes to branding, and this could be a whole nother episode maybe, but it's hard for me sometimes to help destinations build what is an effective brand, like your identity, your personality, your trade, your logo. When I feel like visitors to a destination so often have different perceptions of that destination based on brands that are not the DMO. So let's take, and I know this is an extreme example. Not everyone compares to like New York City, but everyone who's hearing that probably knows about New York City. If you are really into sports, there's lots of sports teams that you have a tie to New York City for those sports. If you're into pizza, if you're into Broadway, but then you hear about crime statistics, you hear about homeless thing. Like, there's so many things that are a brand touch point. You talked about touch points that influence how people feel about that destination. That if you as a destination, as a DMO, try to establish a brand and say, this is what we are as a destination, I feel like in some cases DMOs can't actually control their brand image as much as they would like to. Having said that, to put a critique in that argument, I don't think it means you shouldn't try. Like, I think that a good DMO should still try to help create that central hub we talked about. That's a worthwhile effort. So it's not so much a critique of DMOs that they should or shouldn't exist, but one challenge I would say that they have to acknowledge is no matter how much time, effort, thought you put into your destination's brand, there are brands that exist within your destination that are you don't control them, and they have an effect on how people view your destination, probably even more than what you put out on your DMO website, your DMO ads, and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the hardest parts of being a CMO for a DMO is we recognize that we're the sort of, our brand is the packaging, but the actual product that is being consumed within that packaging, we have very little control over, or historically have had little control over, right? And so ultimately that's going to have, we can influence the conversation, we can create momentum in a direction around, a perception, but at the end of the day, the experience is everything. So, I mean, I've said this before on the show, but I think it's imperative that we all of us as DMOs get more involved in the experience side, whether that's through training, whether that's through deeper collaborations with the folks that are creating the experience, whether it's through certifications. I don't know how that's fully going to manifest yet, but we are definitely betting on a future where we're more involved throughout the traveler's journey, not just in the inspiration, consideration, and the transaction, but actually the pre-arrival, the experience, and the post-stay as well. So we're going to find ways to have more of an influence on that. And I think I was listening to another podcast the other day with, I think it was Bill Geist had Brad Dean on, and he was talking about, a lot of people say control what you can control, but Brad has always said control what you can control and influence what you can influence as well. There are things you can't control out there. That there's things that you'll never be able to control, but there are certainly things that you can eventually influence with time and energy and a deliberate strategy. And I think the product is one of those.
Love it.
So let's jump in. Let's jump into the.
So I asked at the end. I gave no request like, hey, please, pick this side over the other. I didn't give my thoughts. I said, all right, I've asked you to make both sides of the arguments. I've asked you to poke holes in both of your arguments. What's your takeaway? Which side wins the argument? And this is what it said. It said, when both sides are fully considered, the case for DMOs is ultimately stronger, but only if they evolve. Here's why. And it laid out some things that they need that basically the rationale behind what evolution needs to look like. Coordination, strategy, and data infrastructure matter. Modern tourism ecosystems are complex. Without a central nervous system, destinations fall behind or become overwhelmed. The DMO provides foundational structure that no grassroots alternative has yet matched in scope. And so that's number one. Then it said marketing a place isn't the same as selling a product. Places are collective experiences with shared reputations, finite capacities, and civic responsibilities. Having a trusted central voice helps manage the balance between promotion and preservation. And then the third part it says the DMO model is improvable. The alternative is riskier. DMOs have a path to improvement, more transparency, more resident involvement, more sustainable strategy. The anti-DMO argument offers critique, but less of a scalable replacement. So the final verdict is reform, not removal. Like it's worth being there. It's worthwhile if they're pushing to address these challenges and get better at them. And so this says the winning position, therefore, is a hybrid one. Keep DMOs, but evolve them into accountable, community first, data smart, and sustainability driven destination stewardship organizations, is what it says.
Not stewardship, right? Okay, just want to make sure.
So without telling it that I needed to pick one side or the other, it's ChatGPT, at least in my experience with it, pro DMO, but provides some opportunities to be reflective internally on, are we doing the best we can, and what does best even mean? To what end are we doing these strategies, these efforts, spending these dollars, etc. Thought that was interesting, and I wanted to hear you guys' take on that.
Yeah, well, thank the Lord that it came out pro DMO. Otherwise, we'd all be in trouble. I mean, I think any rational person reading this would come to the same conclusion, right? I think there are certainly weaknesses and criticisms that are very valid about our industry. To some organizations more than others, but I think ultimately we exist for a reason. We have a purpose. That purpose hasn't changed, but how we go about it certainly needs to, as times evolve and technology evolves and consumer behavior evolves. So that's part of why we have this show, is to make sure that we're all having these conversations that can drive us forward and make us better tomorrow than we were today. Adam, what are your final thoughts on that?
Take the risk of evolving, because if you don't evolve, staying the same is a much greater risk, and hopefully we illustrated that today.
Yeah, Ken, great content, man. And I know, what I love, one of the things I love about this episode is, you're not someone that's particularly like out there in the public eye in the industry, but you have worked in the industry for 5 years. See, I know that Adam didn't. And you you bring valuable insight from your perspective to the table that we can have an open discussion on. So we invite everyone to come and join this. If you have an idea or thought or criticism that you want to duke out on this show, you don't have to wear your evil mustache. You know, that's just a Camden thing. But we welcome everyone to come and join in the discourse. Camden, final thoughts, big takeaways. Like, what did you ultimately learn from this?
I'm just appreciative of what you guys are doing with this show, and then not just to blow smoke here, but like the reason I asked Adam if I could come on and talk about this with you guys is because I knew that you guys had a show that has established having these real conversations and the highs and the lows, the challenges and the benefits of what you do. And so I knew that you wouldn't treat this as like, okay, we can't highlight any potential risk about what might be wrong with DMOs or anything. But so knowing that you obviously, basically my takeaway is I think you are great examples of that it's a worthwhile and great industry to be in, not because you're blind to its flaws or because you gloss over them, but because you've thought about them enough to identify better ways to do that and are motivated to apply those things. So anyways, I think basically my shout outs just for the show. Anybody listening, keep listening. But yeah, I think it's tourism is an interesting type of marketing, and yeah, I appreciate the time to be on today.
Well, thank you. Welcome back anytime. We look forward to your next thesis. And Adam, any final thoughts before we sign off?
Oh, I would just say we're going to publish this, right? Camden, you'll package this in a way we can share it in the show
Sure,
notes
yeah.
and people can read through everything that maybe we didn't get a chance to cover today.
Yep, we can do that.
Yep, that'll be in the show notes. And then I would encourage you to go put a LinkedIn post too, Camden, and we'll certainly share that. I think
Yeah.
it's a good dialogue for us to have with the industry. So, guys, please leave a like, share, review, all that fun stuff that helps other people find us. But more importantly, go tell a friend. Like, hopefully, you have a friend. We're not your only friends. Although you are our Desties, you're part of the Destination. I'm sure you have other friends out there that would benefit from this discourse. And reach out to us. If you want to reach out to Adam, what's the best way to do that, Adam?
Adam at thebrandrevolt.com or find me on Tourism IQ.
And you can reach me, Stuart.Butler at visitmodelbeach.com. Until next time, this has been Destination Discourse.
Thanks, everybody.